Okay, let's spend a couple minutes just reviewing the neuromuscular junction and the overview of steps for muscle contraction. First, our neuromuscular junction involves a nerve fiber, or terminal branch of the nerve fiber, and a muscle fiber, and connecting here with our muscle, our sarcolemma. So we have our nerve fiber and our muscle fiber, muscle cell. There's a couple structures that we're going to include when we talk about our muscle contraction. First, so at the end of our nerve fiber, we have our synaptic knob here. Within that, we have our synaptic vesicles, which are going to hold and release our neurotransmitter. Our synaptic cleft is this little space between the two cells. So we have the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber here, or that plasma membrane for the muscle fiber, and then we have the synaptic knob, and the little space between them is our synaptic cleft. Along our sarcolemma, we have receptors for our neurotransmitter, our acetylcholine, which will be released from the vesicles. Again, our sarcolemma, we have our T-tubules here. We also have our sarcoplasmic reticulum within the muscle cell here. This is going to release calcium. And we have our myosin and actin. Now, these aren't the greatest drawings here, but we have our myosin and actin filaments. So let's walk through the overall process of what happens when a muscle contracts. First off, we have an impulse coming down the nerve fiber. This impulse comes into the synaptic knob and it stimulates channels for calcium. So calcium can come into the synaptic knob. Calcium will then stimulate the vesicles to release ACH, or acetylcholine. Acetylcholine will leave the synaptic knob, go across the cleft, and come to its receptors and bind to the receptors. Once it binds, it triggers a reaction along the sarcolemma. This is called an action potential, and we'll dive into what action potentials are when we talk about the nervous system. But right now, it's just a wave of energy coming down the sarcolemma along here. That wave continues down the T-tubules, and it stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Calcium then comes over and binds to our troponin, which helps move the tropomyosin, and exposes the binding sites on actin. In order for myosin to be able to bind to actin, we need to use ATP in order to get our myosin heads here in the cocked and ready position and able to form that cross bridge, that binding site with actin. So we use ATP and break that down. And then once those myosin have bound to actin, they can then shift forward and pull forward on the actin. And they will continue to do so as long as there are open binding sites and there's enough ATP. Now, all of these myosin heads just don't go at one time. They're staged. They're going at different times. So it's kind of like pulling on a rope, pulling on that actin, pulling the two pieces together. So let's go back to the start. So first step, we have a nerve impulse traveling down the nerve fiber into the synaptic knob. This nerve impulse stimulates calcium channels to open, and calcium comes into the synaptic knob. Calcium stimulates the vesicles to release ACH. ACH leaves the synaptic knob, travels across the cleft, and binds to the receptors on the sarcolemma. This kicks out a wave of energy moving down the sarcolemma, or our action potentials, and then that continues down the T-tubules. This wave of energy stimulates the sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium. Calcium then travels over and binds to the troponin, causes it to kind of change shape and move the tropomyosin so that the actin's binding sites are exposed. Once the actin binding sites are exposed, myosin will use an enzyme called myosin kinase to attach with ATP so that those myosin heads can get into the ready position and form a cross bridge. Once that cross bridge is formed, the myosin heads can then move forward in what we call a power stroke. Power strokes happen along the myosin. Multiple heads are at different stages so that there's a continuous pulling and power stroke occurring. The myosin head, once it's done the power stroke, releases and is able to start again with more ATP and go through the process again.